changes or additions to the agenda?
Well, so we amended it earlier today to add the Tack Factory Pond Well 17A continuance.
Yep.
And also we just added some discussion items at the top
Okay.
for after the public hearings.
Yeah, Eagle Projects, Tex, Workers, Driftway Platform, and Go Green. Okay, so along with Tack Factory Pond, we're also, looks like we're gonna be continuing Dickens Row, Seaside Road. Right?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Okay, motion to accept the agenda?
Accept the agenda as written with add-ons.
Go for a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thanks. So, what about Dickens Road? We want to continue that to 8/5/19?
I'm there right now.
Actually, you know what, Penny, we got
Oh,
a bunch of these at 6:20, so,
yeah, okay.
Amy, we got like 3 minutes.
Right, so do you want to just take the top of the list, the Eagle projects?
Sure.
So, I mean, over the course of the year, Eagle candidates come up and sometimes they entertain doing outdoor or conservation land Eagle projects. And so we have a couple of interested people now. So we just wanted to bring it into a meeting and see if anybody had any ideas.
I don't know, we could,
We might be able to.
yeah. What do you think? We have a boardwalk piece, or we have a couple of improvements at the Driftway Park. Maybe the trails.
What about the kiosks?
Yeah?
Well, we're not sure.
Yeah.
Well, we could certainly get some
No,
made.
it-
Actually, you know what? We need a kiosk at, we need one at Ellis. The one at Ellis came down and never went back up.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know.
Let's,
Is a kiosk enough? I mean, that's
I
what
don't
would
know.
be helpful to have the candidates here.
Yeah.
The one in particular is out of the country right now but he might be able to come to another meeting.
okay. Do we know how soon he needs? Some of these guys are under a pretty tight time.
I'm thinking that it's a fall,
Okay.
spring type of project,
Last
but I
time
don't
I
know.
did this, it had to be done before school.
Well, yeah.
One over there. But, that doesn't mean these kids.
let's
But in
see if
Hanover,
we can reach out. Go ahead, I'm sorry, go
I was
ahead.
just gonna say, in Hanover, the way we used to see it happen is the Eagle candidate would come in oftentimes with one of their parents as kind of a
Right.
sideline, but it's really their project, it's all about them, not the parent.
Right.
And they'd come in maybe with their scout leader and we would throw out some ideas, but then it would really be up to the individual to come up with a project. And then oftentimes it would involve permitting, so that's kind of a life skill to
Right.
go through the permitting process. And then designing and construction. So that's what I used to see, but we haven't done it with me yet here in Scituate, so you guys probably know best.
No, that makes sense. We can shoot an email out to him and see if we can get him.
Yeah,
And maybe we'll tell him 2 or 3 things that we have in mind and
yeah.
see if his skill set matches.
Yeah,
Good.
they'd be interested.
So kiosk,
Or boardwalk, or some pretty heavy trail repair work. There's a couple of things, so,
It's a great way to get free labor,
yeah.
really,
Yeah.
for the town,
And they have to raise a little bit of money.
It's them, it's good for them.
Yeah.
It's a win-win.
Yeah.
Totally, yeah.
I know they have to raise some money for it, but each one of those projects, we have funds for the big material, and then they can raise money for some of their smaller stuff,
Yeah.
things like that, so, okay. Good,
Okay.
thanks. Nice to see. So,
I'll do that now. I make a motion to continue 2 Dickens Road to August 5th at 6 p.m.
second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
61 Seaside,
I make a motion to continue 61 Seaside to to August 19th at 6:20.
How are they making out over there, Amy, with this project? Is that still just the redesign, or,
We haven't seen anything.
okay. All right.
Second.
Have a second on that one?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thanks. 36 Bailey's Causeway, and 36R Bailey's Causeway. I think we can sort of run these simultaneously.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And if there's folks in here that, I know there's some interest in this, if you want to shift over that way a little bit, and Penny, I don't know if you can see enough of
I'm
this.
fine, because I have my other thing in front of me,
Okay,
the exact same thing. But thank you.
Greg?
Sure. For the record, my name's Greg Morse, registered engineer with Morse Engineering, representing the properties at 36 and 36 rear Bailey's Causeway, owned by the Waldrons. This is the second hearing. This is a notice of intent that we filed for each of these properties to raise and reconstruct a single-family home. There's a single-family residence on each of the lots currently. And at the last meeting, you had requested a peer review. You had hired Bob Gray of Sebacia, Inc. to do a peer review of our wetland delineation and our proposal. Since that last meeting, we've done a site visit. I was there, Bob was there, your agent was there, Mr. Snow, you were there. Our wetland scientist, Brad Holmes, was there. We kind of looked at the wetland flags, and we did submit a revised plan, as well as I submitted a letter on July 8th, kind of outlining our wetland delineation a little bit further. What we did is we located on the opposite side of Bailey's Causeway a salt marsh. It was very well defined in the field. Bailey's Causeway, for reference, is at the bottom of the page. Our property line is in bold. This is the location of 36, which is the front house, 36R, which is the rear house. Across the street on Bailey's Causeway, this is the salt marsh that we added by wetland delineation across the street. Extending off of that is a 50-foot buffer zone, which I've highlighted in red, which encumbers the lot. We also reviewed a suspect area that Mr. Gray had some concerns about when he reviewed the original delineation here. The original delineation, we had highlighted in blue here, the edge of a salt marsh here. But there was a question right now on the western lawn area of the front house, number 36. There was some salt grasses popping up and some vegetation that we wanted to look into further, which we did. We looked specifically at the vegetation coming up through the grass, and then we also looked associated with that with the elevation of the land at that location. Salt marsh, by definition in the state wetland regulations, includes an elevation of the spring high tide. So we have to calculate what the spring high tide would be, and then we would determine any vegetated areas up to that elevation as being designated as salt marsh. I included in the letter 4 sites around Scituate, one in Minot, one in Cohasset. The importance being that they're both kind of on the Cohasset or Bailey's Creek area. I provided another one in Scituate Harbor, documenting the elevation of 5.88 that we used. We located that on the ground, and it essentially confirmed the limits of the original salt marsh line that we had delineated on the left side of the plan there in blue. That suspect area in the side yard, although there is vegetation in it, we couldn't find any criteria that would support it being a jurisdictional wetland resource area. Nonetheless, it's about 200 square feet of area in the lawn. That suspect, we proposed that location as the location for the new septic system and the new driveway for the 2 houses. And what we've proposed to do is to replicate that area, the 200 square feet. We'd be replacing it with approximately 2,083 square feet. We had Brad Holmes, our scientist, put together a planting plan. So again, Bailey's Causeway at the bottom of the page here, all along the left-hand side, along the limits of the salt marsh there. There's an existing gravel driveway. Portions of it are paved out near the street. We'd remove that gravel, and we provide plantings all throughout that area, providing a little bit more of a buffer.
Can I, just 1 second, Greg. Bob, have you seen this
Yes.
proposal? Okay.
Yep. In addition to that, the other plan revisions we did, we added a split rail fence which will demarcate this zone to prevent any future encroachment into it. We located an earthen berm that had been previously constructed out here in the salt marsh. We added a retaining wall around the septic system. We had originally proposed grading off the septic system. It is a mounded septic system. But it was suggested that if we incorporated a retaining wall on it, we could eliminate some of the grading and reduce the amount of fill being brought into the site. We also added a detail along the western lot line here. There's a retaining wall that we have proposed 5 feet from the lot line, and between the lot line and that retaining wall, we've proposed a swale with an infiltration trench within it. Since the last meeting, we've met with the abutter to the west regarding some concerns with the placement of the house and associated with the swale in the grading. We're working on some revisions based on our meeting with the abutter. We also met with the Board of Health last week. The Board of Health expressed that they would like to approve a soil absorption system here instead of a tight tank. We have to go back in front of the Board of Health later this month. They wanted to perform a site visit themselves, but they were looking basically to move forward with a septic system design as long as the Conservation Commission was comfortable with the limits of the salt marsh that we've depicted on the plan. That being said, I received some correspondence today at about 5 o'clock of some pictures showing flooding at the site. The site is in a floodplain, no questions about it. It's in a floodplain. So you will get, on occasion, flooding of the site. We are proposing the house to be up on piles. We are proposing it to be a mounded septic system. But you will get water on occasion over the whole site.
The elevation of the house again?
So the floodplain is at elevation 15. Our first floor is at 17. And
Okay.
for reference, the ground surface in this area is between elevations 6 and 7 thereabouts on the
Okay,
ground.
so there's a foundation now on that first house,
Correct.
right? How much higher will the first floor be than that?
Sure.
Penny, before you start, I was kind of hoping maybe Bob would maybe give us his feedback. I think that would be the best way to run.
No, that's fine.
I think sit right up here, Bob, would be great.
For the record, Bob Gray, professional wetland scientist in Sebacia Inc. out of Pecasset, Mass. And I have had the opportunity to visit the site twice. I've reviewed the original plan. I reviewed the original NOIs. I have reviewed the revised plan, and I've reviewed this planting plan that was prepared by Brad Holmes. I'm a little more comfortable with the situation now than I was initially. The original concern on the west, I believe it's the west side of the property where Greg mentioned the suspect wetland. The original concern or red flag became noticeable when I looked at the DEP wetland change maps, and the wetland change map, for whatever reason, actually shows a solid blue line, which indicates a water course, and that ran from the salt marsh to the north, am I looking right? Across Bailey's Causeway, along that property line, and exited to the rear of 36R. So when I get out there in the first visit, I was unable to find any evidence whatsoever of any culvert below Bailey's Causeway connecting the salt marsh on the north side to the suspect wetland on the south side. On our subsequent visit, second visit, we also tried to chase this down further because it was important if that was an area that was receiving saltwater flow and also had salt water tolerant plants, it would be considered to be salt marsh. We have not been able to establish the saltwater flow. There's absolutely no evidence behind 36R or, again, at Bailey's Causeway. So I would assume that somewhere in time, whatever water connection may have existed that got mapped is no longer present. That time of disappearance, I have no idea. I do know that the wetland change maps have mistakes, and the mistakes continue in time, so they are not to be used for wetland delineation purposes. They're to be used as a guidance in doing some due diligence. I've been trying to understand why we were getting the salt-tolerant plants in that area, especially after Greg provided the information in his July 8th letter verifying that elevation 5.88 was the highest spring tide of the year. So I've given some thought, and then based on a lot of photographs that I've seen, especially those that were sent to me late in the day today, and I'll talk more about those later, it's obvious that the site floods. It's not flooding on the spring tide, it's flooding on storm tides. And what's happening, I believe, is as that flood water recedes, enough of it stays behind in that suspect area, so there was some salt-tolerant plants. Do I think it's a regulatory salt marsh? No, it won't fit the definition, as Greg pointed out, because it's above 5.88. Is it the best location for an SAS, a soil absorption system? That's really up to the Board of Health, and I think they've made their decision, conveyed back to me that they're not in favor of a tight tank and they'd rather go with what's proposed. The original salt marsh delineation I did not have a problem with. I think that that was done fairly conservatively. I think that the biggest plus for the salt marsh, based on the current plan, is two things that have been placed onto the final plan that I reviewed, and that is the elimination of the driveway, which runs to the left of the house in the salt marsh. So you'd have the salt marsh, driveway, and then the house. And that's eliminated, and now you have 2,200 and some odd square feet of buffer plantings. I would, before I forget, like to say that Brad's plan is quite good, but I would hope you would just convey to him he needs to put some kind of title on this with reference to 36 and 36R. I don't think I saw that I know it's the site. We all know it's the site, but it would help if it had a title. The only other critique I'd make about the planting list, and this is based on, again, the photographs that I've seen, which substantiate that the area is flooded on a rather frequent basis. The area of your proposed plantings, this plan right here, is not going to have any increase in elevation due to filling. So it's going to continue to be flooded throughout these March storms and April storms and the winter storms and so forth. The plant list has black chokeberry, northern bayberry, Virginia rose, and eastern red cedar. Those are great plants for coastal flood zones, coastal buffers, but not in an area that's going to be frequently inundated. I think you're going to lose those. The list also contains switchgrass. Fine, I think that'll be a survivable plant. It has high tide bush. High tide bush likes its feet wet in salt water, so it will probably survive. I just ask you to work with Brad and maybe get some more plants. If you want woody plants, get some that are more salt tolerant than the northern bayberry and the rose and the red cedar. Red cedar grows in perimeters of salt marsh. Sometimes it does quite well with the inundation, other times it doesn't. One of the problems I'm sure the commissioner is aware of is that when we get nursery stock, we don't always get something that's compatible with the local conditions. So if that red cedar that he's planting in this particular location has never dealt with saltwater conditions, probably 1 or 2 flood events, it's going to start to die. 3 or 4 flood events, it's going to be all brown and dead. So just replace those. I think at this point I'd like to hear from commissioners to see what questions you might have about my report or what questions in general, and see where we go.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Bob. Appreciate your diligence on this one, too. So, Penny?
I don't have any questions for you. I read your report. I appreciate it. I like the working together between the two of you to come up with a solution here. And it does flood. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, but the house is up and there's, it floods, that's all. But it isn't the ocean. It is marsh, and it will go back out.
Okay. Jen?
I really appreciated your explanation. It was maybe one of the easiest to understand ones I've heard. So it was very easy to convey, and I think there's definitely some thinking to do on the planting and how that affects the orders. Did the size of the back house change at all? Because wasn't there some discussion in the prior one about how it was bigger than it originally is?
So both houses are around 26 feet wide by 40 feet. It's like identical house footprint, front and back. They are both bigger horizontally than the houses that are out there today. What's out there today, they're each 2-bedroom houses. We're putting 2-bedroom houses back. But yeah, the horizontal footprint, they are bigger.
Horizontal, like they're just bigger in general.
Okay. Yeah, they're bigger. Actually, the last page of my letter here,
Okay.
I summarized
I'll pull
the
it up.
ground impacts. They are bigger, but they are, they're being elevated. So, for reference, 36, which is the house out front,
Yeah.
on the ground right now takes up a total of 781 square feet. When that goes up in the air, there's 18 pilings supporting it, which take up 57 square feet on the ground. The back house is 555 square feet on the ground. That has 18 pilings, so it goes to 57 square feet on the ground. 26 by 40 is the building footprint. It's
Yeah.
about 1,040 square feet
Okay.
in total.
Thank you.
Paul?
No questions.
Lisa?
I think it's positive that it's going upon pilings and not a foundation. Planting plan looks good. Your additions to it sound like a great way to go.
Amy, do you want to weigh in yet? I'm going to go to the audience after.
Yeah.
So anybody in the audience that would like to speak to this project at this time?
We're here for this project, but I just been following along on the reports.
Okay. I've got a few that would help. First off, I can see there's a little bit of a pickle here. Typically, we don't close until the Board of Health approves the system, although it looks like the Board of Health's looking for some, I don't know, have you talked to the health agent? What's their,
Well, I think they want to see us confirm the resource areas,
okay,
which looks like we're doing, and then they're gonna get a, I don't know, approve the plan,
okay.
so.
Well, I got a few. So one of the things that we discussed while we were on site was the spring tide of 588 and how to confirm that. And I know Greg said he's referenced 3 or 4 other projects. You know, we have certain tides that are clearly delineated. This one seems to be a little bit of a moving target, and I just,
The only recommendation I think that I could give the commission at this point, since Greg's provided you with 3 or 4 cases that are nearby, I think you need to look at going forward in any project that comes to you that involves a piece of land which also either abuts or contains a salt marsh. Just remember to not only ask for the vegetative delineation, but to ask that the plan show the highest spring tide of the year, which is according to the regulation. Over time, you may get some engineers that are providing little differeces. At some point, if you get these little differences, because I'm going to mention one in a moment here, you might reach out to something like CZM and say, okay, we received a plan, we got 5.88, we got 5 plans in this vicinity with 5.88 by registered engineers telling us that that's the highest spring tide. But then we get 2 plans and they reference 7.5. Why do we have this discrepancy? And see whether or not, if the CZM can give a logical explanation for a discrepancy in the spring high tide. It may be based on where it's located along the shoreline. There may be a
well, we know the
particular-
flood maps vary all over the.
They do, but if you recall, Edward Foster? At Edward Foster Road, I believe the engineer came in at 7.3 or 5, something like that, with the spring high tide. So here we are at 5.88, and he cited additional plans. It's a little baffling for me. I think if we had much more time and I was here in town, you could maybe have time to go through some files, town maps, etc., and try to pin this down. But I think you're dealing with legitimate information, verified information that Greg's presented at 5.88. I think a lot of the pictures that were presented are showing tides during storm events. I didn't have time, I didn't get these until late in the day, but I was sent one picture here from January 20th, 2019, and as you can see, that's one of the houses, and there's a lot of water there. So I Googled Scituate, Mass. Coastal storm, January 20th, 2019, and some information came up. In fact, there was a little
Drone?
drones. Thank you. I was drawing a blank. There was a little drone coverage of some part of Scituate during that storm. Likewise, I did a quick shot for this picture on March 4th, 2018. So there's the same house with, again, a significant flood event. And there was some evidence on the net that there was a coastal storm event. I looked at some of the other dates. I didn't have a chance to go through those. But I think if you receive some pictures in some subsequent filings, you can check the weather records to see if we're working with a storm event flood versus just a normal high spring tide of the month.
Okay. Well, another thing, there's a berm that was created around that site, hopefully to keep some water out around those houses. Do you think that berm is effective? Is it detrimental? Is it better off to just let it alone? We're trying to, in looking at this project and thinking about mitigation and some restoration or whatever, somebody added that at some point in an effort to protect this property. Now we got houses going up on piles and whatnot. Do you think that berm is still, is it, if it's not detrimental, it really doesn't matter?
Or would it do more harm to remove it? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's maybe something to discuss with Greg, and maybe you could have Brad take a further look at that. I don't recall what the elevation of the berm was versus the elevation on each side.
Hard to tell, it's so vegetated.
Right, it was a heavily vegetated area. Is it effective?
No.
It's not effective for the storm events. It is effective to keep some of the salt water on the salt marsh versus in the guy's driveway, maybe, but I don't know enough about the history of the area. Would this be the time to remove it? Probably, if you were thinking of trying to
Well, either remove the whole thing or make a couple of openings so that
right, maybe that's the solution. Maybe it's worth investigating to see where the property owner wants to go with this.
Okay.
I will say that the flooding that you just saw in those pictures is obviously going to be less of a concern for the two houses that are put on piles than it is in the present situation. Those houses that are placed on the piles will also have some fill between 36 and the adjacent property line up to elevation 10. Floodwaters will go under these houses, in and amongst the piles. They won't be going into the first floor because if I read the information correctly, the first floor elevation is at least 2 feet above flood stage.
Right.
So the town and the commission are getting two structures that are not particularly flood-proof right now.
Right.
And they're both built into the substrate with the cinder block foundations or whatever. You're gonna end up with two structures that are on piles. The floodwaters will move under the structures. There'll be less flooding on the overall lot because of the design and the fill. And the reason, as I understand it, that the fill is being brought in is basically to meet the Title V aspects of the SAS system.
Sure. And that's part of the, as we look at this, I mean, weighing out some of these pieces, we have right now 2 homes, occupiable homes, that have essentially cesspools
Yeah.
Yeah.
at best. And now you're going to be moving towards an approved Title V septic system, so hopefully water quality, things like that, would be better served with this system as opposed to leaving the things alone, for all kinds of reasons, whether it's flooding, the driveway on the marsh. There's a number of reasons to say that this certainly improves the site. The other thing we try to have some continuity. Which you weren't involved in, around on Bayberry Lane, we conditioned a home that was sitting on the marsh, very similar, flooded all around it. The applicant tore it down and built a brand-new home on piles, on a foundation, actually, right? This one was on a foundation. And because it was on a foundation, I think we held them to the footprint or the square footage of the house that was there before. So we can argue that, there's less ground contact, so you can measure just the diameter of the piers versus the whole area of a foundation. But we are now going to create 2 homes that are probably year-round houses and bigger bedrooms and things like that. So in reality, we could wind up with more water flow. I don't know if that's something that the Board of Health looks at when they evaluate a septic system. Basically, it's the number of bedrooms and the gallons, but you essentially could wind up with more water and more affluent flowing into this area. Now, granted, it's going to be treated and
Into an
improved.
improved system. Yeah.
Right, but it's still a greater use when this is all done, and a couple of larger buildings in an area that's marginal. As we
Yeah.
weigh all this out, that's kind of where, in some ways, it definitely improves the site, makes things better. On the other hand, we're building in an area that
Understood.
and we have that same issue at Bayberry. There was a house that flooded continually, but technically there's a house there, wetlands protection and all that sort of stuff, and we have them happen in a number of areas, so kind of weigh out those.
I think that's what commissions throughout the coastal areas in Mass have to constantly do, is they have to weigh what are we starting with the current structures and what are we ending up with.
Right.
So you have to look at this site and look at the negatives right now. You already mentioned you get 2 cesspools.
Yep.
You get a driveway that's very close to the marsh. You have, because of the way the driveway is laid out and so forth, you have very insignificant buffer to that salt marsh. When you have flooding right now, whatever is in the basements of those houses, I don't know what's in there, but whatever it is, it's coming into contact with your floodwaters, and when the floodwaters recede, whatever's down in the basement, if it's material that can mix in with the water, it's flowing out with the water. Post-construction, you have a lot of positives here. I want to say one final point about the fill, because this constantly comes up in terms of concerns of the abutters, and I If I was in a butter, I'd be concerned too if I'm looking at placement of fill on an abutting lot. The way the state looks at fill placement in a coastal floodplain such as this is that it has a de minimis effect. There's no lateral displacement. The floodwaters are not going to be higher because of this fill. They're not going to go onto the abutting properties because of this fill, because the way the state has evaluated placement of fill in a coastal flood zone is that the displacement of the floodwaters is to the ocean. The ocean is very big, so you get a little bit of displaced floodwater.
Putting a few grains of sand in a bathtub.
Yeah.
Now, remember, there's also freshwater storm events, so that's a little different. So one of the things that you should work with Greg in the final analysis here is to be sure that his swale that he's proposing between the lot 36, I think the swale goes down to 36R as well, but I couldn't tell if it goes all the way to the back property. But the swale, it should be designed so that on a freshwater event, like a big thunderstorm, that swale is not conveying water onto the abutting property, nor do you folks want it to be conveying water onto Bailey's Causeway. So there ought to be some kind of analysis there to make sure the swale's not going to cause more problems than it's designed to do. I think it looked pretty good, but
Okay,
it's
Thank
just
you.
something to take into consideration.
great. Can I just, this issue with the Board of Health. So I think what Board of Health was looking at is the commission comfortable with the wetlands line and the evaluation of the site. And I'm not sure that we want to close this and do that because we don't know where things go. And it's just, can we give them that,
Sure. So I met with the Board of Health last week, and I expect to go back to them on July 22nd. What I'd like to tell them, because when I was in front of them last week, there was still question on whether the suspect area was a wetland or not. I think we've nailed that down at this point. I'd like to think so. But if I can go back to the Board of Health and tell them that you've had your peer review consultant review the wetland line and the boundary that we've depicted here is what's accurate and out there. Now the Board of Health can really evaluate the septic system that's in front of them. I would expect that they would likely approve it at their next meeting. But I would ask for a continuance from this commission until at least August 5th.
okay. All right, anybody?
A couple of things I had in my mind. One was he's got a proposed gravel driveway. So, I mean, I don't know. In my experience, I've seen that if you have a septic system go in, they usually want it to be paved on top. If you have a drivable driveway, so what's going to happen to that? And is that going to impact our project? Like, how do you guys feel about, should it be pervious in perpetuity? Because we always see after the fact people coming back for us and trying to pave these anyways. I mean, so I think we need to weigh in on that. And the berm, I think we need to be thinking about the berm. And maybe some additional detail for the swale, because I see he's got a detail for the swale, but I don't, it's really hard to,
Maybe some calculations on that, Greg.
I know, Greg, is there any way we can get this to be a bigger scale? Or
Sure.
so we can see what's going on this plan a little bit easier?
Yeah, I can certainly add some more detail on the swale and some additional spot shots and everything there.
I mean,
Maybe
so you've
maybe
got
blow
the-
it up.
the
Absolutely.
scale, but I mean, it's all crammed in this one little spot, so.
Sure.
That's it? Okay, anybody else?
And the plantings.
And the
We
plantings.
should
Yep.
be charged with the plantings.
Yeah, well, you got the notes on that.
Yeah, I'll have Brad call Bob and just run through the planting list and any other suggestions.
Great.
Absolutely.
Okay,
So I make a motion to continue 36 and 36 Flower Downs Causeway to 620 on August 5th.
Second.
Till when?
August 5th.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you. Bob, thanks so much. Really always appreciate your insight. 2731 Hood Road. Again, I know there's folks in here that want to see this. If anybody can't see it, if you want to move around a little bit, or maybe we can turn the easel a little bit if it helps. See, maybe you can turn that just a little bit more. And I'd suggest if anybody's here for that, if they want to sit more towards that side. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Hazem Dani from CHA Consulting, in attendance with Chris Lucas from Lucas Engineering, on behalf of the Coptic Orthodox Church in Scituate, located at 2731 Hood Road, and we are here before you for two permits, a stormwater permit and a notice of intent associated with our project. Our project, basically, just to give everybody a quick background, this is our second hearing for this project. We continued our hearing from last hearing 2 weeks ago, and our project consists of two different parts. The first part is the installation of above-ground propane tanks that are partially installed in the 50-foot buffer to a BVW. It's designated as Wetland A. It's located on this side of the site, which is the west side. And then the second part of our project consists of clearing 1.16 acre of land and convert it into lawn. Our clearing limit exists in the 100-foot buffer to two isolated vegetated wetlands. They're shown on blue, in blue in that plan, which is wetland B and wetland C. Our clearing does not encroach on the 50-foot buffer to the isolated vegetated wetlands, but it's only located in the 100-foot buffer. To give you an update from last hearing, we had some stormwater comments that we were addressing. We addressed the comments issued in the first letter prior to last hearing, but within the 2 weeks period, we received a second letter from Merrill Engineers. He had two main comments. The first one is that he did not agree with that delineation of the watershed. He said that we should include additional area up north that could basically drain to swale number 1 and swale number 2, and that potentially could overtop the swales. We revised our calculations and we revised our watershed delineation, and he agreed to them. Also, he had a concern about channelized flow downstream from swale number 2. Let me just turn this to the revised plan. This plan is just to display the buffer zones. Here's the revised plan, which we sent to Amy on Friday. The revised plan basically addresses the issue of a channelized flow in this area. We also received a similar comment from Mr. Adam Brodsky, who was here last hearing. He said something about a site clearing in the past year may have created a channelized flow in this area. So we extended our grading limit to a partial area behind the school building that may have been altered in the past. This area does not encroach in the 100-foot buffer to any wetland areas. We also added a note to prevent any channelized flow in this area. And earlier today, Merrill Engineers sent their final review letter, and he confirmed that we satisfactorily addressed their comments. With that, I'll turn it to Chris Lucas so he can explain his findings about the wetland areas and buffers.
Thank you. My name is Chris Lucas with Lucas Environmental, professional wetland scientist and registered professional soil scientist. And there's been a lot of debate about the wetlands. We've been on the site numerous times. We originally went out in June of 2018 and flagged Wetland A, which is a BBW along the western portion of the site. Originally, the scope was looking at the edge along the building in this area where the proposed playground was going to go, and the project expanded. We had not looked at this area at the time. We came back out in April and took a look at it. And DEP originally identified wetlands along this area, south of the easement, and throughout this whole portion. That mapping is erroneous. We've been out in the site. We've identified a long linear isolated wetland B and a small little isolated wetland C within the access roadway here. Wetland C actually has some indicators of hydric soils, and it does have the 3 criteria: hydrophytic vegetation, hydric soils, and hydrology. It appears it's due to compaction of the soils. It's all fill material through here. So I think over time, everything's compacted, water sitting on there, which is developed. It's being maintained, so it's mostly herbaceous species. Wetland B, I know, has a history in front of this commission for work off to the east. We've been out there. There's no intermittent stream flowing through here. I was even hesitant to flag this, but we did delineate it. There is a prevalence of wetland vegetation in this area. We flagged in April, just prior to the start of the growing season, so there was a bit of hydrology, leaf staining, and some other indicators through this area. So we used those 2 factors to delineate this. Since that time, I know Mass DEP's been on the site, Andrew Poyant. He has a soils background. He concurred with us that there are no hydric soils present throughout this area, which was surprising to him as well, based on the mapping, and in fact there is a bit of red maple and some other hydrophytic vegetation. Tom Liddy, professional scientist and registered professional soil scientist from my office, has also examined these areas and concurs that there were no wetlands in this vicinity. Particularly, we've also evaluated this area because there was a lot of standing water. This is, I believe, Mr. Snow saw during the original site walk back in April. There was a lot of water here.
Right.
We've plugged, there's no hydric soils in this area. Following that, James Hall from CHA has also poked around the site a little bit. He's with CHA, he's a professional wetland scientist, he concurs with us. I know the commission has hired Art Allen from Ecotech to do a third-party review of this, and based on his response letter, and I know he's there this evening, he's a certified professional soil scientist, he's even a step above us, recognition in soils. He concurs with us and concurred with the delineation. And, I think there's preponderance of evidence here that supports the plan showing the delineation is done.
Okay.
Leave it to that before this question.
Sure. I don't know if Art, do you want to just elaborate just a little bit for the, so in the room, Art is our consultant for this project, and well-respected person. We've been out on the site, I've been out there several times, and to Chris's comments, first glance at some of these sites leave you questioning, and so that's why there's been so much review with the soils. And I was out there again when Art reviewed the site for a period of time, as well as when the fellow from the state was there, and a few different times. So we've been out there. But why don't you elaborate a little bit more, Art, on your findings? And
certainly. Arthur Allen from Ecotech Incorporated. Since everybody's reciting their credentials, certified wetland scientist, certified professional soil scientist, mass approved soil evaluator. Was out there, as Frank mentioned, on June 27th of this year. Reviewed the site plan, walked the site, performed about 20 auger borings in and around the wetlands, sampled the soils. I also noted a mixture of upland and wetland vegetation throughout the buffers, particularly in the area which had been identified on the MassGIS data layer as being a more extensive wetland area. Again, those data layers, they're done from aerial photo surveys. They're not done from on-the-ground mapping or sampling or vegetation or soils. They're strictly done from air photo interpretation. So they can vary. I mean, they're good general guidelines, something we always review. prior to visiting the site, but nothing we would ever rely on, for anything definitive on the ground. We'd always, go out and see for ourselves and count the vegetation and sample the soils, which is again what I did on June 27th. Found myself in agreement with the delineations, and in reality, the delineations appear to me to be conservative. I would agree with Chris that I found well-defined hydric soils within the bordering vegetated wetland in the area down in the lower left, and then I found some pockets of well-developed soils again in that wetland C is the smaller one, right? Yeah, and then the B, wetland B, the soils in there had some features, but were clearly not fully developed hydric soils. So, but then in the outside of the delineated areas, in all my investigations, I did not find any additional areas that I would consider to be vegetated wetlands based on the full approach to soils, vegetation, and hydrology.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.
I'd just like to add one, going on that. Wetland B, as you know, I was a little hesitant to delineate that, and I know there's a long history, so we decided just to move forward and flag the area and move forward with it. So.
And you've explained that to me and to others out there, and I think that for folks that are trying to wrap their head around this a little bit, you have a GIS layer, you have a map that shows up as a wetlands, you know that there's a wetlands on the other side, you walk the site, you see a number of things that are characteristic of a wetland. I know when the property was marketed by the Archdiocese, they actually showed the potential for wetlands to be in that site, although their disclaimer on that thing was that those wetlands or any markings needed to be verified by someone. But there was enough reason to believe that there are other wetlands on this site, as well as other hearings that we've had. And so I think that we've done a pretty good job of having the right people take a look at this and give us, I think, a fairly true picture of what's out there. And I guess I would have to concur that some of the markings on here have been certainly on the conservative side. Someone that was really arguing this thing could argue for something less than that, but I feel I could agree with that assumption. Penny, why don't you fire off?
Are we gonna do the stormwater next?
We can talk about the stormwater as part of it. I think Hassam's already explained.
Yeah. No, you've satisfied all my questions and concerns on the property and where the lines are and not. I don't really have an issue with it now, and the stormwater looks very good.
Jen?
I'm good for now.
Okay. Paul?
No questions.
Lisa?
No questions at this
Amy,
time.
what do you want to add to this?
Well, I mean, so procedurally, we've, and with our standard deadlines that we use, so we did receive just today the sign off from Merrill that CHA had met all their concerns. They revised the plan, met their comments. Actually, I haven't fully read that because it did just kind of, but I distributed it. That's about it. But I guess it would be up to you as to whether or not you feel like you want to close tonight, or if you want to keep it open to the next meeting so that you have a chance to review that material and ask questions. But I mean, the fact that they signed off, I did see that everything says satisfactorily addressed. This is all with respect to the stormwater.
Sure.
And as far as the wetland delineation, I mean, I feel very comfortable given all the professionals that have weighed in on this, including numerous site visits from most of everybody in this room, that, we're in good shape as far as that goes. So, I mean, we have a project that is buffered to BBW. It did trigger the Scituate stormwater bylaw because of the threshold of more than 15,000 square feet disturbance. They're putting in stormwater controls so that the interests of not having stormwater runoff impact abutting properties should be met. So I think it's a pretty solid project. So I would probably go back out to the,
We're gonna-
interested parties.
Yep.
Yeah.
Why don't we open this up to comments from the audience? I'd never like to question or comment.
My name is Anthony Pombianco. I'm an attorney for Chris Scanzilla for 8 Ingrid Lane. I just have a couple questions for Art. and
Can you just spell your
concerns.
name for Jen to?
Get your name again.
Anthony Pombianco.
Can you spell that?
P-A-N-E-B-I-A-N-C-I.
Thank you.
Sure. And to echo what was just said, unfortunately, I can't speak too articulately as to the new plans, revised plans, seeing that we've just seen them now today. But I do have some questions for Art, if you would.
New plans for
The
the.
revised plans. The
Okay.
revised plans. Typically we have more.
All right, the wetlands piece has been out here for a while.
The wetlands piece, but
The stormwater, or the revised one is, well, how long ago did that get delivered to
Friday.
Merrill?
Friday.
Okay.
Yep.
So,
But for Art's purposes, if he wouldn't mind, he did speak about having, I think, 20 borings, he said, that he looked at. That are sort of generalized as to the location of them in the description. If he could provide a little bit more color as to where those borings were, if by pointing and demonstrating on that, if that's
Sure.
possible. If you wouldn't mind. Thank you, Art.
So we parked out on this side of the existing building, walked down in between. I augured a transect down through this part of the proposed playground area, and then walked across, augured across this side of the playground, so transect down and across. Then we came around this side, down through here, took a few borings on the perimeter of this wetland C, walked up the driveway. I poked in and did 2 or 3 borings. There's not much distance between that, the existing cart path and the wetland. That's pretty well defined on that side. But then went around the perimeter, walked the wall partway down and poked in about 3 or 4 locations and did some sampling, soil sampling and vegetation counts along in here. Walked back out this way, saw this low-lying area that had some staining, appeared to have potentially ponded some stormwater, appears to kind of collect stormwater off the building. This area has been recently cleared. There's a little bit of a depression there with some evidence of ponding. But I sampled, took 2 core samples in there, and those both proved to be non-hydric upland soils in there. Very little vegetation. Then walked back along the front of the building, down into the buffer zone between the wetland and the existing propane tanks, and sampled 2 or 3 locations. Came back out to the parking lot here. So I did a pretty thorough reconnaissance of the site, focusing on the wetlands themselves and the buffer, the immediate buffer areas.
And then I would also just want to mention some concerns that we may have about the maps themselves, in that a trenching in the lower left side was observed in the southwestern portion of there, which isn't depicted on any plan. Additionally, the clearing that was observed in October in the sort of center of this is not depicted in the plans themselves as well, which was first addressed here previously. But I would ask if the observation that were made, that I think you spoke to earlier, about the vegetation, the wetland vegetation being present in that, what we would call the clearing area, essentially between C and A, in the white space in there. If the underbrush wasn't cleared in that particular area, whether or not wetlands vegetation would likely be present as observed?
Through the chair, there was, it appeared the area had regrown quite a bit between when it was cleared and when we were, I was out there on June 27th. There was quite a bit of herbaceous growth sprouting. Actually, the majority of it was upland indicators. There was a lot of grape in there and mullein. There were a few sprouts of skunk cabbage, which is a little bit unusual to see in the outer buffer, but it was not a dominant species in there. It's a pretty strong wetland indicator plant, but it was not dominant throughout that cleared area.
Where did you see that, Art?
In down in this the playground.
Okay.
Proposed playground area.
Yep.
Here. So there are some red maples in the overstory, which is a facultative plant. Statistically, 50% of the time it's in the wetland, 50% of the time it's out of the wetland. So it'll grow either in the wetland or upland. But those facultative plants, if they're dominant, they're considered a wetland indicator. So because of the, again, the some of the wetland species that were observed in there, I certainly had reason to sample the soils. And again, the soils were clearly non-hydric, upland soils outside of the.
What was the trench area that you asked about?
Southwest, section a little bit more southern, if you will, into the west, right there.
Great areas.
So sort of at the back of the building, the back of the activities building or whatever we call that. Yep.
And I did, again, I that's the area I think I mentioned. It looked like there'd been some stormwater accumulating and runoff in that at the corner of the building, and I did again sample several locations in there, and
Yeah.
they were also non-hydric soils.
It definitely was wet, but again, we looked at those soils, yeah. Okay.
Can I just add to that too?
Sure.
I spoke with Tom Liddy, because he was out here in June of 2018 prior to the clearing, and he did extensive walking through, because this was very dense area. And I particularly asked him down here what the species were. His recollection was it was similar to what's there now. Staghorn sumac, fox grape, I think honeysuckle he saw back through here too, so he didn't see a lot of wetland vegetation. He did see, as Art had mentioned, red maple and some other indicators of wetland species in here, or at least on the edge. He didn't go that far back in, but that was indicative of what we're seeing now coming back in.
Okay.
And then the only other concern that I had or comment was whether or not site plan review for the planning board was necessary for this project. The regulations for wetlands require that all permits or approvals feasible are obtained prior to closing the area by the Concom. And in this matter, I think 770 of the bylaw requires site plan review or a waiver to be acquired. And I don't know that a waiver has been acquired, so I think site plan review is necessary prior to closing.
We sort of have taken position with stormwater to not have people go through sort of two perils, if you will. When there's a wetlands hearing, the Conservation Commission would typically take up the stormwater. If there was no wetlands, then this would be a planning board issue, and we wouldn't even be here tonight. This would solely be by the planning board. But to not have an applicant have to go through both aspects on a project like this, the process for the town has been that we would hold those hearings sort of simultaneously. We'll have the same wetlands, the same stormwater consultant regardless. So that's sort of been the approach.
Can I speak
Sure.
to
And
this?
yep.
Adam, which I'm assuming you work with Adam, yeah. Adam reached out to Karen Joseph, the town planner, today regarding that question, and her position was communicated to Hazem, which was that they probably seek site plan waiver after getting through the conservation process.
Okay.
Hazem, do you have that email? You could read it to them if they needed to see it. But
I don't have it right now, but she basically said that once you receive the Conservation Commission permits, you should apply for a site plan review or a waiver.
Okay.
I think that's the reverse of how the actual regulations work, that it's, I think you get the site plan review prior to the town approval, or you have to obtain the waiver. But the site plan review wouldn't, in my understanding, wouldn't review just the stormwater related issues. It would be an actual full site plan review that is necessary, such as lighting and other matters, but they're traditional in the site plan review.
Okay.
And that's concerned by the butters.
All right, well, it's not our purview. If there's other pieces that the planning board may have, I guess that's something they can take a look at and see. Okay? Anything else? Greg?
Greg Morse, registered engineer, Morse Engineering, speaking on behalf of Chris Scanzillo. This property generally drains in a northeasterly direction or an easterly direction to Ingrid Lane, which is a private road just off-site on the right side of those wetlands that you see up there. The concern is that if we're taking the stormwater and now we're directing it into this new stormwater system, and we have a point source discharge coming out. Along the side of Ingrid Lane, there's a swale that's not depicted on any of the plans. It prevents water coming from this property onto Ingrid Lane and washing out Ingrid Lane. We want to make sure that that swale is not overcharged by any of the discharge now that it's in a concentrated condition as opposed to a sheet flow condition. We didn't see any calculations of that swale's capacity or any depiction of it on the site plans that we received today.
Which swale is that?
There's a swale along the western side of Ingrid Lane, which conveys water so that it doesn't flow onto Ingrid Lane.
Is it possible that
You want to point that out, Greg? Because I mean, we walked out there, and I don't remember seeing much of a swale there, to be honest with
Well,
you.
Ingrid Lane is raised up just a little bit. You know, it comes up this lot line here.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the road itself is about a foot or so higher than the land adjacent to it on the
Right.
church's side.
I don't recall seeing a swale there. I could be wrong, but
there might be one at the end of Ingrid Lane. where it's
at Hadley
Lane.
Road.
Yeah.
Right.
But there's nothing down there. There's just a isolated vegetated wetland, which is depicted on the plan. And also, Merrill engineers confirmed that there's no point discharge or concentrated discharge points resulting from that project based on our recent site plan that was delivered to him on Friday.
Okay. Well, it may, if this is going before the planning board, you may want to bring that to their attention at some point or whatever. Okay? Anything else before we move on? Sure.
So I have a
And you just want to, your name and address?
Jennifer Way, W-A-Y, 17 Hood Road. So I'm in the butter on the side and in the back. And so I'm a bit confused by some of these conversations because they're a bit over my head. But one of my questions was, are there going to be additional propane tanks than the ones that are already existing that were just put in? I was hearing about propane tanks. Will there be additional ones also? Or no? Do you know that?
I'll refer to the church
Okay.
for that.
No, I think, and I should have brought those up, as, you know, the big focus has been this clearing in the field, but the other part that they did mention, and it's actually an after the fact, is the church installed a couple of propane tanks on the west side of the building, which technically should have been permitted before they were installed. The lawn has been cleared almost right to the wetlands line, and that's been there for as long as St. Francis was there. And so in an effort to install these, they worked with the fire department to find a location for the tanks, and they put them on that side and away from everything, but technically those should have been filed for in the beginning. So this is sort of an after the fact for those, but we've also brought to the attention of the church the buffer and whatnot on that side of the building, that they really have to be cognizant of that wetland when they do other work around that area. They do have a lawn that's already there, but any changes or improvements or whatever need to come before the commission, and they've told us that that's all they had in mind for that spot. So.
And then another question is, if this is approved by the Conservation Commission, will this still be planning board or planning site review or not? Because it seemed to me I heard that it could be waived or it may not be waived. Because I have the same concerns about lighting and the actual function of the property. I know there's going to be a playground on it, but with over 50,000 square feet, I would just like to know what the size of the playground is or how far away this would be from my property.
Amy, you had a conversation with planning.
Yeah, so my understanding is that they would file something and the planning board would take the matter up. And what the name of the approval process, I'm not sure what exactly it is.
So that can't just be approved with a waiver? So they can't use a
Well,
waiver?
I mean,
I'm just
it may
concerned
be
about
called,
lighting
it
and
might
my
be
house
called
is
a
all-
waiver, I'm
Yeah.
not, but they would get some kind of approval.
So we would be able to then revisit this in another.
Yeah, so
planning
you
board
could
hearing.
make comments to the planning board, or get your questions answered.
There's some of these pieces fall within our purview. A development of a site or something like that would go before the planning board. So, but they may be able to go to the planning board and say, what we're doing here is of little significance, especially if there's no lighting or anything. If it's a field, and the planning board could look at it and say, we don't really see the.
Right, it might be a simplified.
But that's not for us to say.
Right.
It's up to the planning board, yeah.
I just want to make sure that that opportunity would exist.
Okay.
Because it seemed like I heard that in the waiver, so I wasn't sure if the waiver was waiving the planning board.
We don't issue the waiver. It would be the planning board that could issue a waiver and say that they don't feel that there's a significance here. That's up to them.
And can you tell me how far away that is from my property? Are you able to see that? I can see it, I just don't know in feet or,
Are we talking about this?
no, I'm on Hood Road right next to the church. So yes, that would be me.
We're talking about this playground?
Well, or any of the work that's being done. The lawn and
We
the.
set back the clearing limit 35 feet away from
Okay.
the property line. And also the playground area is about 155 feet from the closest corner of your property.
Okay, all right, those are my questions.
And the playground size is 1,750 square feet.
Okay?
Yes,
And, well, Jennifer, also, just so you know, I had put out to the engineer at Merrill specifically regarding your property, because that came up at the last meeting. And he did specifically address that in his professional opinion that you wouldn't be impacted by this project,
thank you.
the stormwater, so.
Yes, sir.
My name is Tim Montgomery. I'm at 345 Hadley Road. I'm in a butter. Just had two very general comments.
Sure.
One was, I think Scituate should thank its lucky stars that the church bought the church property and didn't fall into the hands of the developer. We have another Toll Brothers on our hands. So I think it's great that they came to the neighborhood. And the second point is, the church was very welcoming and getting comments from neighbors, met with neighbors, adjusted their plot plan, reduced the scope of the project by over 50%, and it did that in response to concerns. So I thought they ought to deserve to get some comments.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any other questions at this time? Yep.
I make a motion to close.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for all your work, all of you.
Appreciate all the
Yep.
effort.
Thanks.
Second.
Let's see.
Rich the present, but it would not be hard.
So we're going to continue Tech Factory Pond.
You back that on August 5th at 6:20.
To be fair.
Huh?
Oh, we haven't even opened it.
Oh,
Thanks, Jed.
I'm continuing.
That was a practice, dry run, yeah.
Okay.
Practice shot.
We'll open it when.
So on July 15, 2019, at 6:25 PM, the Town Hall, Scituate Conservation Commission will hold a wetlands hearing under Chapter 131, Section 40, Massachusetts General Laws, and Section 30700, Town of Scituate Code of Bylaws, and Section 32050 of the Town of Scituate Stormwater Bylaw regarding the application of the Town of Scituate for improvements to public water supply well 17A, including construction of a 60 by 50 water treatment building, installing a backup generator, a 27,000-gallon backwash water tank, underground piping, stormwater management, infiltration basin, and constructing new access drive with 1,465 square feet of new pavement on property located at Tack Factory Ponds Drive, Scituate, Mass. Work will occur within 200 feet of the riverfront area and 100-foot buffer to bordering vegetated wetlands. Abutters and other interested parties are invited to attend.
Okay, I'll make a motion to.
Do we have, you're not here for that, okay, go ahead.
Jump the gun.
Sure.
I make a motion to continue Tack Factory to August 5th at 6:20.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So now, this is 52 Central?
That's correct.
Okay, so, on July 15th, 2019, at 6:30 PM, the Town Hall Scituate Conservation Commission will hold a wetlands hearing under Chapter 131, Section 40 of the Massachusetts General Laws, and Section 30700, Town of Scituate Code of Bylaws regarding the application of Mary Louise Green to replace an existing sewage disposal system at a dwelling located, 52 Central Ave, Scituate. Abutters and other interested parties are invited to attend. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is James Green. I'm an attorney, and I am the spouse of Mary Lou Green, who owns property at 52 Central Ave. We also own the house next door at 54 Central Ave. So this is a 4-bedroom summer cottage. It's only open from April to November. It's not going to be a year-round house. It's been in my wife's family for 3 generations since 1928, 29, and it's serviced by a septic system which, to say, is quite old, I assume. And what we'd like to do is replace it with a new Title V compliant system with a leaching field and so forth. I did the same for my house about 7 years ago at 54 before the commission. It works well. It's checked every 2 years, and we'd like to do the same for 52. We also had asked that there is an asphalt driveway. This house is at the corner of Manchester Street and Central Ave. There's an asphalt driveway. We're going to replace the asphalt with crushed stone, and I asked Jason Gary and to apply. To believe the commission has approved it, but I think both projects should take place at the same time.
Okay.
To my left is Bob Hannigan. He's here for John Keefe, my engineer, who prepared the plans. He knows more about it than I do, but I just cut the grass. So.
There you go.
My name is Robert Hannigan, a registered professional engineer, and I'm pinch hitting for John Keefe, who's out of state. He's enjoying Yellowstone National Park.
Good for him.
Presently. As Mr. Green has said, it's a replacement of an existing cesspool with a Title V system. John had mentioned that the Board of Health has approved the system. The reason we're here, I believe, is it's in the flood zone, and the important point here is the final grading will be the same as the existing grading, so there will be no change in volume or elevation or volume.
Okay. Penny?
We like to see those cesspools go.
I'm sorry?
We like to see the cesspools go.
Oh, I think that's common, very common.
Exhibit or something.
Fill it in.
Fill it in.
No questions.
Lisa?
I think it's a great idea.
Amy?
No comment. It appears to meet the requirements of the act.
Anybody in the audience? What was the second piece that you asked about?
The driveway.
Switch from
On
pavement
the
to...
plan, it shows a paved driveway off of Manchester Street.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We're replace that, Amy has an application on that to replace it with crushed stone.
Crushed stone, yeah. Not pavement.
Not pavement, no, crushed stone, pebbles, whatever, something permeable.
Pervious
Yeah.
driveway.
'Cause right now, with a range of.
Oh, yeah, we appreciate it.
And that's not within the area of the new leaching
We're-
system.
Anytime we can get impervious surfaces, we're all for it, so I appreciate that as well. Okay, anybody else?
I make a motion to close.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
It should be good.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, huh?
Good job.
Okay. Sure.
By my client,
Okay. We're gonna jump from the RDAs for a second, and we have a enforcement order for 138 Stockbridge Road. Good evening.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
And just for the record, you want to state your name?
Sure. Joe LaBreche, 138 Stockbridge Road.
Joe, thanks for coming in.
Yeah, no problem.
Amy, do you want to start this one, or
Well, I mean, it's pretty quick. I think it's a pretty visible area of Scituate. People drove by, observed that you were working the buffer. So it's a house that was permitted not too long ago, pretty tight with the wetland buffer. So Scituate's got a 50-foot no disturb. I think I just measured off, I think at some locations on the left side, it's as tight as like 10 feet to the 50-foot, and then as much as 28 feet behind the deck. So I think we had some alterations within the area that is marked off as just in the buffer. And I'm not sure how extensive it is, so I mean, I think that probably first step is to assess the area of alteration and come up with a plan to restore it.
So, Joe, just,
Yeah.
I do recall, we conditioned this, as Amy said, not that long ago. I think actually Steve Bjorklund came before us. He was a developer.
Yeah, I don't know the history of the...
So this developer came before the commission requesting, same kind of hearing you've heard earlier tonight.
Sure.
That this house be built in this area adjacent to a wetland.
Yep.
So when the commission approves a project like that, they set stipulations on the project. And I think in your case, there was a buffer line drawn in the back, and there's some markers
Yep.
that say this is a protected area and a buffer zone.
Sure.
So there's technically not supposed to be a disturbance outside of that without coming before the commission and saying, you know, hey, I've got this issue or whatever. Is something like this workable? And this is not the first time this sort of thing happens. A lot of these
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
projects can be approved and then they change hands. I think Steve sold it to O'Neill.
Yes, yeah.
So it's flipped over a couple of times.
Who I bought it from when it was 90% done.
Sure.
So,
Yep.
yeah, I mean, I spoke to Amy last year about this. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, can I talk?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I spoke to Amy last year about this, and the issue at the time was some dirt that was put in the buffer, from what we talked about, and you had said get it out of the buffer, and I've done that, and I haven't done anything really since. So to me, it's all growing back from anything that's been cleared from the edge there, but there shouldn't be any issues at this point. So that's why I was a little concerned when I saw the letter again, because I haven't done anything more. So
Did you respond to the first letter?
I did. I talked to Amy when I got the first letter, and we talked about potentially maybe you guys coming for a visit or something like that, and it just never went anywhere from there. So
Okay.
But to me, at the time, the point is at the time, I got an understanding of how it works with the buffer, which I didn't really know about, and I haven't touched it since.
Okay. And I've just ridden, but, you know, after this came to our attention, I
Yep.
rode by, looked in the backyard from the road.
Yep.
And I could see the markers, and then it looked like this area that's kind of clear behind it or whatever, so.
Well, I cleared a little bit of area, but it's all grown back. So
Okay.
that's why I say, you know, it's, I haven't touched it since.
Okay. And so you're aware, you're in a buffer zone. If you have some, we conditioned a project a couple years ago
Sure.
on Bayberry Lane.
Okay.
And we told the applicant at the time that they weren't supposed to enclose around their deck, okay? And then the applicant, because it's in a marsh area and it's right on the edge of the marsh.
Okay, yeah.
And whatnot, that applicant built his house, had the deck, and then came back and said, hey, nothing's growing under here, and I've got a problem with foxes and animals
Sure,
living underneath
sure.
here, and I want to do something about it. And the commission talked to him and said, you know what, you want to enclose that, but you want to plant a few things around it, we can work with you on that. So I guess my point is, if there's a compelling reason to do something in your backyard, I know that Amy told me you have family and
Yeah.
and whatnot, as long as the work that you're doing is consistent with the Wetlands Protection Act, and there's a legitimate reason to deal with
Sure.
something. We've had others where, you know what, somebody made a plan for draining water and it really didn't work.
Okay.
And that had to be addressed. So the commission's not like this.
No, I know, and she explained that to me. So the example that you're talking about, I guess I'm confused, because you're talking about the buffer, inside the buffer, or you're talking about in general, or I guess that's where I'm confused what the rules are.
You can't work in the wetlands area itself. But
Right,
within
I
the-
understand that.
Within the buffer area, we have two buffers. We have a 50-foot and 100. So there's,
Right.
typically the commission says there's no build in the 50-foot buffer.
Right, right. And that I understand after speaking
Okay.
to Amy last year.
So if you came back and said, geez, I want to build a garage out here or my shed or something
Yeah,
like
no,
that,
I
we'd
don't,
say
I
pull
want to do any
back.
of that, yep.
But if you came to the commission and said, you know what, a bunch of the stuff that's out here is dying or dead or it's
Yeah.
a problem, I'm willing to plant X, Y, and Z in the buffer to enhance it.
Yeah, that's in fact what I want to do with,
So,
we're talking about
you're,
this.
that's
yep.
you can do something like that. You should just come before the commission
Okay.
and say, here's my issue. You know, my kids are out here, the mosquitoes, blah, blah, blah. I want to do something here. I realize that the 50-foot buffer is here. I'd like to plant it with these plants.
And those I'm sorry to interrupt you, but and those plants are some of the plants I've heard tonight, like, you know,
Well,
that
some of
fit-
the plants you heard tonight are for a marsh.
Yeah, okay.
So
Well,
there's-
not those ones, but the.
But you could find others that would work for your backyard.
Okay.
That would be good for habitat, but at the same time might be safer for your family or.
Okay.
Or something like that.
For the buffer, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
All right?
All right.
Just so you have an idea of
Yeah,
how
yeah.
that works.
It's a little confusing because if you know the area, it sounds like you've driven by.
Yep.
That, and we were talking about this a couple weeks ago, all my neighbors are right back to the wetland.
Right. So.
Including
so
my neighbors next door. And I understand that this is, you know, this lot was changed hands a few times and was developed sort of after the Protection Act now, I guess.
Right. So to your left, you know, I know to the left, that's been there forever. And-
Right,
And
yep.
if a place was filled prior to the
I know,
Wetlands
I get
Protection
it.
Act, there's really not
Yep.
much either one of us are going to do about it. You know, you also abut, you know, way back in the property, and that we've got violations we're dealing with back
Yes,
there as well.
yeah, I'm aware of that, yep.
Some of that's been inherited by past commissions
Sure,
and stuff,
sure.
and the commission's working to improve some of that. So it is sometimes frustrating when you can look at another area and see a place really degraded.
Yep.
And say, well, wait a minute, there's nothing wrong with my backyard at all. I'm trying to clean this up a little bit and improve it. And over here, they flatten the place, or Toll Brothers has cut down everything from
Right.
Tilden Road. How does that work? But it was an exhaustive process to go through.
I understand.
And you don't have to go through that kind of effort to get there.
Thank God.
But, but it is protected.
Yep, I understand.
We've had a recent hearing You know, we look at sites like this earlier one where they're trying to build on a marsh. There's already stuff there. We're trying to figure out how to make that compliant to some degree. And so I'm saying this because I don't want you to walk away and say, oh, geez, you know, what the heck have I got here? There is the opportunity to do that. It doesn't have to be some full-blown thing with a whole bunch of engineers and stuff like that.
No.
But you can come in with something that.
I'll go bankrupt on that, so.
Yeah, you don't. And you know, we realize people buy a piece of property and they want to improve it and make it fit their.
Sure,
their
I
needs.
appreciate that.
So.
Yep. Good. So I guess what would you have me do? Would you?
Is there more, does he need to do anything? I didn't go out there, so I haven't, other than drive by. Maybe what you want to do is think about what you'd like to do out there.
Okay.
Sketch it up, do
Sure.
something simple, give it to the commission.
Okay,
And
perfect.
let Amy give you some direction
Sure.
on how you want to address that.
Can I talk to you, Amy, about plantings and about, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, but don't be mistaken, I'm not a wetland scientist. I mean, I can
Okay.
give you some general direction.
Right.
We can probably figure some stuff out, but.
There's nurseries too that have lists of plants in different environments for them.
Yeah.
They can be helpful.
I mean, it's already all vegetated, so we're talking about if I did anything, it would be right where the posts are, the
Right.
markings.
Right.
Yep.
So it's not, I'm not even talking about going into the.
Yep.
It's all growing up. I mean, it's
I get it.
it's overgrowth. I can't
Yeah.
even plant anything in
And
there,
a lot
so-
of that will. I mean, Mother Nature's pretty self-healing.
Right.
You get an area that's cleared, you let it go for a little while, especially an area like that, and it's just right back there.
Okay.
Well, I'm concerned, I mean, we should all be concerned, right, about the knotweed dominance in that area. It's pretty crazy, so
Yeah.
I think.
That's the other
to the
piece.
extent that we can
yeah.
like try to balance that.
I didn't mention, there's some plants that we consider invasives. So
Okay.
knotweed that looks like bamboo. And I don't think he's got any.
No, I've never
He might
seen
have
that.
it way back.
There's some at the end of the Stockbridge, down the other way.
Right. Yeah, I don't think
Again,
you've got.
People are right
knotweed.
on the wetland,
On
but
the
it's
other
not.
side of Bob, the lady that lives in that house has it.
Yeah, because that's from Phil that spilled over from
Yeah,
the
yeah.
other side. But
You know, about down-
Oh, with the cinder block walls and everything? Yeah, that's where that whole other
Right.
ordeal is, so.
But I don't
yeah.
think you've got
No. I've never
knotweed in
seen
that
bamboo.
area. But there's other invasives that, you know, sometimes that's a good reason for people to clear an area as well. They can look at it and say, geez, this bittersweet's growing all over the place
Yeah,
here and
okay.
choking out everything.
Right.
And I'd like to, you know, replace that with
Blueberry bushes.
something.
That's come up,
Right.
blueberry
Yeah.
bushes.
Yeah.
Those are apparently good.
All right?
All right, good.
So.
All right, I
That might
appreciate
be a
your
good
time.
way to attack that.
Okay, thank you.
right?
All right,
Good luck.
Okay, we'll be in touch
okay,
soon.
all right, thanks.
Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
331 Gannett Road. This one here, I should probably recluse myself. I do work for these folks on occasion. I'll open it, and then I'm just not going to vote. That. On July 15, 2000, what's that?
Existing.
It is existent, but on July 15, 2019, during the 6:15 meeting of the Town Hall, Scituate Conservation Commission will act on the request of Anderson Fuel for determination of applicability of the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act and the Scituate Wetlands bylaws to reclaim and resurface existing pavement of a parking lot on property located at 331 Gannett Road, Scituate. Abutters and other interested parties are invited to attend. Greg?
Good evening. Greg Morse, registered engineer, Morse Engineering, representing Anderson Fuel Incorporated at 331 Gannett Road. This is an RDA which would allow the Andersons to repave their business facility at 331 Gannett Road. The plan here, Gannett Road is on the left-hand side. Their main office building is at the front. They have a truck storage building in the back. Second truck storage facility. They have a parking facility for all their home heating supplies. This is largely a paved area. There are wetlands off-site. To the east, we have a bordering vegetated wetland, and then to the west, we have a bordering vegetated wetland. We had permitted several years ago some upgrades to some pipes within the parking lot itself. But this time around, all we're doing is repaving the asphalt that's out there. It's become cracked and deteriorated. It's all over the existing parking lot. We're not adding any new impervious surfaces. We're not changing any vegetation out there. It's just removal of asphalt and resurfacing of asphalt.
You're gonna remove and then,
There's certain areas where they'll cut out some of the deteriorated asphalt,
yeah.
and then the new asphalt will go down right in that same location. It's all the same limits. We have erosion controls proposed along the edge of the wetlands. So where we're not proposing to remove, fill, dredge, or alter a resource area, we thought an RDA would be appropriate.
Jen?
I'm good.
Looks good.
Amy?
Yeah, so it's true, they have done improvements, you guys have handled them as requests before. The last one was in 2015, to replace 3 catch basins and associated piping. So that must be what Greg's talking about. And then again, back in '09, they did some improvements. I mean, you know, you could probably go either way. This could be a good opportunity to get some stormwater improvements, but we don't really have much control under this. So, I mean, a repave, we did just let the town repave Egypt Beach as a request. And we did get some stormwater improvements with swales along the edge, you know, but I think Greg's presenting a pretty straightforward.
The history of that is, I think that they did those improvements back when they did the repairs, that there was, at the time, they were getting ready to repave, and then instead of repaving, they basically just made the repairs. So I think subsequent to that, they used to have.
4 years ago.
Yeah. Subsequent to that, they used to have oil tanks that were up on stands that were pretty much unprotected. And then they changed that, and they built a pretty state-of-the-art storage tanks with containment and all the latest up-to-date check valves, pumps, you know, where stuff used to be done by gravity, now it has to be pumped. So it just alleviated issues of spills, so.
Yeah, I mean, as a licensed site professional, I've seen a lot of oil terminals in my life, and it did, their housekeeping, I'm not gonna say that their housekeeping looks poor, it looked pretty clean and nice back there, so, I mean, for the interest of moving things forward, I suppose a -2 would be what you would vote on.
And that, I'm not gonna, I'm reclusing myself, but they do have some erosion control around that basin that's in the middle of the parking lot as well?
Correct.
Okay. And that's where everything sort of comes to.
Yeah.
Anybody in the audience? I make a motion for -2.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On July 15th, 2019, during the 6:15 meeting of Town Hall, Scituate Conservation Commission will act on the request of Michael Lane for determination of applicability of the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act and the Scituate Wetlands Bylaws to build a deck on property located at 280 Gannett Road, Scituate. Abutters and other interested parties are invited to attend. Good evening.
Evening.
So you want to just fill us in on what you want to...
Just Michael Lane, 280 Gannett Road, and just want to put, I think the deck is 12 feet by 22 off the back of the house. There's an existing wraparound driveway. We're gonna, you know, it's not gonna be a wraparound driveway, the driveway will just come to about where the deck is, and that will stop there.
So it's just gonna go in one side?
Yeah, I'm not gonna have the go around the house anymore. I don't wanna push it back or anything. I just wanna come down that one side and that's it. Yeah. Yeah, I think it takes 4 pylons, 4 sonotubes.
Penny?
No, I don't have an issue.
Yeah.
A deck located inside the 100-foot buffer from marsh on the edge, blah, 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 to eliminate part of the driveway, because it does wrap right around.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just gonna, footprint will be right inside the driveway, yeah.
Yep, the deck goes to like the middle of the driveway.
All right, what's this?
Oh, on the bottom part there, I was kind of just brainstorming. I was thinking about redirecting the water back to the ocean. Just to kind of keep it, when the storms come in, the water does hit the side of the house, so I was just thinking maybe I could raise it up under the deck a little bit with some type of retaining wall, and not a big deal, don't care.
That's not something we normally.
All right. I was just sitting at home thinking that would be something to read. Yeah, just try to keep the water away from the house, but
I hear you.
it's not life or death. I'm used to it. Yeah.
That house.
You can X that out.
That house has survived many, many years.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I wasn't, it's not that I wasn't paying attention, but I didn't, are you relocating this existing gravel drive around the porch? Or is
No.
it you're gonna
I'm just
close
gonna
off that driveway?
close it off to,
Okay.
like, where the stairs are, I guess, wherever the stairway goes in.
So,
So when where it wraps around the house, won't wrap around the house
Okay.
anymore. And
so are you turning the rest of that driveway into lawn?
lawn, I guess.
Okay,
Yeah, we'll take the rocks up and,
okay.
sure.
Well,
No questions.
Lisa?
It's fine.
Amy, anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I think it meets the requirements of the Wetlands Protection Act and the Scituate bylaw. It's 50 feet off, and of the flood zone, so
Yeah,
4 footings.
yeah.
I think you could approve it as a negative too, which is good.
All right.
Okay.
No negative, yeah, for sure. I'll take it.
Okay.
I make a motion for a negative too.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Good luck.
Thanks.
That'll be ready tomorrow.
Okay.
And we can- Or we can mail it to you, either way.
Some people do. Have a good night.
Thank you.
On July 15th, at the 6:15 meeting in the Town Hall, Scituate Conservation Commission will act on the request of Cindy, is it Risku? Risku, for a determination of applicability of the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act and the Scituate Wetlands Bylaw to replace existing trees with other native shrubs along the side of the property located at 54 Moreland Road, Scituate. Abutters and other interested parties are invited to attend. Good evening.
Good evening. So, a few months back, my husband and I bought the property at 54 Moreland, and it's adorable.
I love it.
I love
Yes.
it. I love it. The contractors, I think, really do love it because they've been in it for 4 months now, and, you know, they promised me that it would be done the first week of June, and
Oh, they're enjoying themselves down
Oh, they're not even behind.
Yeah, exactly. 2
I
weeks.
haven't had that, I've
To be
never,
done in 2 weeks.
yeah, he told me 5 weeks, and
Yeah.
that was April sometime.
Yeah, let's not be bashing the contractors. No.
That's what they do.
I've already lined them up.
That's what they do.
And they said, thank you for being patient. I said, not patient, get it done, get out of my house. I feel like I'm in a movie or something. So I'm a landscape designer. I told everybody, you know, that I was gonna clean up the yard, and nobody said anything about Conservation Department, North River Commission. I knew nothing about any of that. So I was gonna get my landscaper out there because the grass was like, you know, really way past knee high at that point. And I thought, this is terrible. I'm being a horrible neighbor, and, you know, I got to clean up this yard, and people are never going to believe I'm a landscape designer if my yard looks like this. So I went next door because on, in the pictures, do you have these pictures? Okay. So my next door neighbors, if you're looking at the house, Jerry and Maureen, but I don't remember their last name.
Kelly.
Oh, okay. Okay. So along there, I wasn't really sure about my property line, and I don't want to just go in there and do something and then find out that that was really theirs and not mine or whatever. So I went over and I talked to them because the cedar trees that are along the really cute fence hang over the fence. They're starting to fail. You can see a little bit of brown in these pictures. I learned from talking with Jerry and Maureen that the realtor of the previous owner limbed these up. Because I was like, what is going on? Like, half of them are completely grown crazy, and, you know, into my driveway, they're starting to fail, they're hanging over my neighbor's fence. I discovered that was their fence, my trees, but they paid for the trees to be planted. Not gonna ask I always plant my own trees. I don't know how you get somebody else's to, plant, to pay for plantings on your property. And so they said they didn't mind that the trees overhung their fence, but it's all over these beautiful patios, and it's just like, I found that odd. They did mind that the realtor limbed them up and now there's no privacy. Which is exactly, like the part where they got limbed up is where we would be eye to eye, like off of my little deck, and then they've got these beautiful patios, and so I like where there is privacy, we don't need it, and now where we need the privacy, there is no privacy. So I said to Maureen and Jerry that I was gonna think about taking the cedar trees down and putting up a shrub that would be a little lower than the height of the fence, because that's where we need it. Nobody has second-story windows up there, so we don't need the privacy above the fence line, and I would restore the privacy screening. And then that's when they said, like, well, you need to talk to North River Commission. I'm like, who are they? And so they also said we needed to talk to the Conservation Department. But they were more keen on the North River Commission. So that's my next foray into all of this. So, because I called you guys first, and I spoke to Jennifer, and she was like, oh, no, you definitely need to talk to us, and that's when I, submitted the little, I was kind of embarrassed to sketch up the plan, because the plan is where there's these cedar trees that don't do anybody any good right now. I just wanted to take those out and then plant, I like to landscape with native plants, and I have lived near a beach before. When we lived in Virginia Beach, we were at the beach, so I understand salt-tolerant plants. So I just wanted to replace them, and I don't know what else to say. Like, I don't have a fancy thing out there for the easel. I don't.
Right, so what makes your property jurisdictional is the distance to the river, and so it's buffered within riverfront, so it's where it's jurisdictional 200 feet, and then also flood zone. But I think that a portion of your property is in flood zone, but not actually where you are talking about is out of flood zone.
I've been told we're not in the flood zone.
So down at the toe, you're probably are down there, right?
I was told no.
Down there you're not. Okay, well that's good. So
because we are uphill, and I haven't gone into the marsh yet to look back, but there is kind of a drop off at the back end of my property.
Right.
So
then more similar to Border Street, where you're buffered to the salt marsh and the river system.
And a lot of times we're talking about people disturbing native growth. And this looks like somebody planted these as kind of ornamental along a fence.
Yeah.
I was really surprised that they were allowed.
Yeah.
There's so many other prettier things that we could have chosen, but.
They've been there for a long time.
Well, the previous owner lived there for 10 years, and I don't know when those trees were put in, but they're they're still kind of skinny. You can see them, they've been there for a few years, but I don't think they've been there for 20 years, kind of thing. Because they're still pretty skinny.
Well,
you can see the limbed ones.
You'd like to.
I would like to, I would like to
Going
replace.
all the way down to the back.
No, they don't even go. They just, that's it. That's the end. It's not even, I really meant to go today.
Can I?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I meant to measure and I didn't have my wheel with me.
So the reason the Kellys probably brought that up to you is they've come before us a couple of times with some trees that are in their backyard between their house and the marsh. They had some cherries and stuff that had some size, and they wanted to remove them, and they came before the commission with a couple of landscape projects as well as the trees, so.
Oh, their backyard is impeccably landscaped.
Right.
And I'm sitting there looking at this, kind of like what the other person was saying, I'm looking at completely landscaped, meticulously landscaped backyard, and they're saying, I don't think they're gonna let you touch those cedar trees. And I'm like, how does this happen?
Well, so let's, we got a few other things to do tonight.
Yes.
So.
Me too.
Okay. So typically we get some sort of a survey plan or something like that. You've given us a sketch with some trees on it and a replacement of what you'd like to do there. And I can see your point in wanting to remove these trees and replace them. I guess if we feel like there's enough information here in the replacement of the trees. It says native shrubs, and then there's a list of some shrubbery along here. The reason, my point is that we've asked other of your neighbors to be in compliance with what we're doing, and so that's all we're looking for with your project.
Oh, I'm sorry I didn't know anything about it. I thought, maybe I missed something in the closing papers, because if you've got all these rules and regulations, they're...
The only reason that they'd be in your deed is if the person that you bought the house from had filed with the commission and come in before. If not, these are just regular laws that exist with buffers and whatnot. So if, let's just say that in the case of the Kellys, if someone were buying their house, in their deed it is recorded documents from some of the work that we approved in the past.
Okay.
So your house, maybe no one ever filed anything with this. And so now, you have this project which seems like it's fairly small in nature, but that's the reason that you go through that. And then the North River Commission, it has some fairly strong rules and regulations.
Yeah, I received 2 letters from them 2 days after I talked to Maureen and Jerry.
Right, about the kind of things that you should or shouldn't do or come before them for.
They just said that they would like to discuss it at their next meeting, so
Right.
I gotta figure all that out now.
So, and I think you probably would be wise to go in there with a decent plan showing what you're
Okay.
trying to do,
Okay.
and they're reasonable folks as well.
Okay.
But their purview is more like the view from the river. They're trying to protect the view from the river, and they have a kind of like a sliding scale. The closer you are to the river or the marsh, the more restrictive. The further you get away from the river, the more leeway you have.
Okay.
So, I think that what you have here is within, everybody should have the chance to look at it, but it seems like you're within reason for what you want to do, but I think that you'd want to check with them, because part of their purview is actually the diameter of those trees. You're going to want to make sure they know how big those trees are.
Okay.
As part of that as well. So-
And I know that they're at the top of the property, they don't go down the back hill, they're pretty much, they stop halfway at the house. Do you know the house, Penny?
Yeah.
Okay, so they stop pretty much, I don't even think you get down as far as the kitchen door. So it's like halfway, not even halfway down the house, so it's really all up near the driveway and the road.
How many trees do you think it is?
Well, the dumpster's in the way, but I'm guessing about 12. I think they were, that's what I was guessing just from this picture. I think that there's 6 of them that were limbed up. They might be, maybe, I'd have to get around the other side of the dumpster, which is kind of tight. As you can see, it's like growing into the dumpster at this point. Maybe there's only a couple more, 2 or 3 more up there. I didn't really want to, they're really buggy too. So.
Is that your dumpster?
Yeah, she's got the contractors that won't leave, yeah.
I've got the contractors that
2
are like
weeks.
squatters'
They'll be
rights,
gone in
I
2
think, at
weeks,
this
yeah.
point. I think they are. I think they're going to spit when I'm out.
I think she needs to go to the river.
Yeah.
Commission.
Yeah, this isn't a
gonna
normal
wanna know where the
problem, like where
200-foot
people are
setback
messing
is.
with the native. I mean, to me, you're gonna make an improvement. You're gonna take out this ornamental row and put in native shrubs.
But I think we can give her a negative
Yeah.
determination, but
But-
it's just subject to the approval of other boards.
Correct,
and
right,
commissions.
right.
So before you do it, get your permission from the North River Commission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other,
They said something about a July 25th meeting, so I just have to find out where they are, where this meeting is, what time the meeting is.
Right,
I
right.
got lots to learn before July 25th.
yeah. The other thing you might do is you might want to get your assessor's plan or something
Okay.
to show like where your house is, where the marsh is,
Okay.
where these pieces are, so that when you go before them, they've got a clearer view
Okay.
of what you're trying to do. I mean, this really doesn't tell us much.
They're gonna wanna know how far from the
far?
river and,
Okay.
yeah,
Yep.
the resource areas in the
Okay,
house. and-
I'd
Yeah.
definitely give them a little, you want to get some more
More
information.
specific information,
Yep.
okay.
Okay?
Yeah, I didn't know about them until I got the letters. Okay. I know, I just went next door because I thought, well, just in case they're not my
Yeah,
trees,
they-
or
they-
maybe they've been
yeah.
sitting there going, when the heck are you gonna finally at least trim them off of my patio? But then they said, no, we don't mind them, but then I found out they paid for them, and I'm thinking, well, yeah, I would be a little upset too, but I assured them that I would put something, native
Sure.
back in that actually provides privacy.
Anything else going on in your yard would need to come before the commission. If you decide to do a patio or whatever you do for disturbances in the back
I
needs.
have no more money.
They're not even done
Those
yet.
renovations, I know, right? I'm like, guys, you gotta wrap this
No
up
wonder they're not
because-
coming back.
No, I cleaned up
Good.
existing beds, we mulched, we edged, I pulled weeds out, I
Yeah.
Trimmed things up.
That's all minor.
That was it.
Yep.
And that's all I plan to do
Sure.
with that.
The Kellys will give you good advice.
Okay, North
All right.
River Commission next.
Yep.
Okay. A motion for a -3.
Second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I know you hear negative and you're like, oh no. Okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you. Have a nice night.
Thank you too.
So, certificate of compliance for 168 Vernon Road? Septic?
Yes, I'm gonna have you guys sign off on that one.
Okay.
And then, all right, while we're talking about that, we can kind of slide into all the other things we're gonna cover really quickly.
Sure.
But so here's a 304 Clap Road is a certificate of compliance. I think they've got a partial right now. And you know the house?
Yep.
Okay, you guys conditioned it.
That was
a couple
Bill
years
Eaton's
ago.
house at,
Right.
Yeah, all right, so you had there was a replication area in the back left corner.
Yep.
Pretty extensive planting plan that he planted, but he didn't provide us any documentation on it.
Okay.
So I have been speaking with the contractor who's been rehabbing the property, it's up for sale, and Zimmer had the restoration plan that he
Yeah, that was a
planted.
Zimmer Grady project, I
Right,
think.
exactly. It was in fact planted, but now it's been filling in with knotweed. So I spoke to John Zimmer today, actually, and he said that, it's tough. He's like, he can tell and that he could document that it's all went in, but there is definitely a substantial knotweed problem, or colony, I guess I call it, not only in this area, but all in the back, is neighbors to the right, like it's all over the place.
Right.
So the question is, what do we want to do? I mean, because he did in good faith install all these plants, I mean, are we good to go? And, next time around, we'll just issue this after we get the documentation, said documentation, to issue that certificate? Or do you want to have this turn into some kind of a remediation program? I mean, I think it's going to would be throwing a lot of money at trying to rectify something that's a big
No, I mean, if
problem
he,
out
to
there.
me, if he performed what he was supposed to perform and then nature did something different afterwards, you're kind of changing the rules then, you know?
But they can, I think that's important that the person that's getting the house or whatever, that they know that they can continue to try to control that knotweed. They have to be aware of what the rules
Well,
are.
at that point, though, they would need to come back to us, though, because now
It's
they're
not, we don't
working in
have
the
that,
buffer.
we don't have that as part of the
As a
orders.
continuing condition. Well, we
Yeah.
might be able to do an ongoing condition of the certificate of compliance that they're permitted to do knotweed control. But then, I mean, if we do it as a continuing condition, we're not gonna have control over it. They're just gonna be out there willy-nilly trying to do it.
They're not gonna hurt anything.
Right, so then just think it through. Then a neighbor calls, they're working in the buffer, well, they've got permission.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Up to the stone wall, they're not going past the stone
Yeah,
wall.
no, I just wanted a little direction on that.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, here's one, Go Green. So we know that we got that letter from the attorney, alleging that there's water going off-site. And we also had some concerns, we walked it as a commission up onto the property to see if there was encroachment onto conservation land.
Yep.
Frank, Sean McCarthy and I did a little bit of research about the parcel ownership out there, and Sean came up with this map that here shows the Go Green and the windmill. And so the question was whether there's trails that have now
This
developed
is good
onto,
for us.
off of Conservation Commission land, onto other town-owned property. It's getting closer to this, so maybe they're observing this stuff, because now suddenly there's more trails or over time.
But when we were out there, we did see water
No,
going off the
no,
They have
didn't.
sure got a lot of material,
fine.
that little
But-
piece of land.
But anyway, so
Yeah.
the answer is that there is no encroachment on conservation held land, because this is the land. This is actually selectmen.
Yeah,
So some of our trail network
like all of it.
is actually on this
Yeah,
parcel.
yeah, oh, yeah, most of it, because you
Yeah.
can see it.
Yeah.
This is the far point.
Yep. So I think it might be worth our while to just go before the Board of Selectmen. And we have trail maps already mapped out for most of this.
Yeah.
And maybe we should be in front of the selectmen, just saying, hey, we're developing this and we've got some trail network.
Because it's not truly conservation land.
Right.
Yeah, on
And
their
just
land.
make sure that everybody's okay with that, you know? Because I've gotten calls, others have as well, that, hey, these guys are encroaching on conservation property. And it took a little bit of research. You look at the assessor's plan, and then these things are numbered, and it's not clear from the assessor who has what piece of property, but Sean did some deed research on some of these parcels. They all came to the town through the acquisition of the Boston Sand and Gravel property a long time ago, and then the selectmen divvied up different parcels. You know, some of them are the transfer station, some of them are now the golf course, and then the Driftway Park, which is conservation, and then this area here where the treatment plant and Go Green and the windmill. So I think it might be a good idea, we can maybe put something together and go before the selectmen and just say, hey, here's where we're at.
Yeah, we're
And,
the ones that are encroaching.
Yep.
Not the-
Well, I don't know that I think we're being pretty careful, but it would be probably the right
Well,
thing.
no, just to let them know that we've gone
Yeah.
to town-owned property,
Right.
not conservation.
So there's a conservation restriction in place for this, but,
Right.
okay.
When it's under the care and custody of our commission, there's rules and regulations that don't apply to land that's held by the selectmen. They're free to do more.
Yeah, they can do more.
Well, I mean, do you want me to contact Lorraine and get us
I
on
think
an
so,
agenda?
yeah.
And we can just talk about open space as it relates to Board of
think-
Selectmen held land? Is that what you're?
Yeah, maybe we need to do this like twofold, because I think, wasn't it the selectmen that wanted us, or someone wanted us to go out and take a look at this property?
Well, no, I mean, in our department head meetings, we talk about all the different cases we have in town, and one is, Go Green in their lease
Yep.
is something that, is a hot topic for some.
Right.
So anyways, as part of the hot topic discussion, which the selectmen have the biggest piece of, Jim asked that we check out and make sure that we didn't feel that there was encroachment from
Okay.
their operation, which I feel
Well,
like.
I think we could say that, and
Yeah,
at the,
we've satisfied that in our site walk.
but we could say that as well as,
Well, and then,
where we are.
after that, though, we received a letter from an attorney representing, I think a resident who's alleging that there's environmental concerns and that the Conservation Commission should look into it. But I think that those are tied to the other concerns that
Right.
selectmen are already addressing, like, for instance, road dust and, I don't know, whatever other resident concerns people have about that place.
Right. Well, but we just
But they're
wanna.
not our concerns.
Yeah, our purview is what
Right.
we wanna,
Yeah,
okay. Everybody good?
yeah. Okay, so then we have, tax worker, senior tax worker for trails.
Right. Do we know who they are?
There's one individual, I've got his name.
Okay.
Which I sent him to you by email.
Okay.
And he's ready, he could probably do 100 hours between now and the end of the quarter.
Okay. The trails, the folks that have been doing a lot of our trail work sort of like to knock it off when it's cooler.
Yeah.
I don't think there's too many of them out there that are jumping at the trails this time of year, so, but maybe we can figure out
Plus
some,
supplies are out there.
Yeah, well, so maybe it's a matter, I can explain that to Linda, but anyways, actually, I am just a facilitator here.
Sure.
I'd probably like to pass this person off to who's ever organizing trail work and see if we can.
that's what I'm saying, yeah, let's,
Yeah.
and you did that in an email to me already?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
A couple of months and they'll be there.
What's Driftway platform?
Oh, so the platform at the Driftway Park
Oh, right.
is in need of some repair, and I've asked one contractor, I'm trying to find somebody else that will take a look at it and get back to us with a number to make repairs for the time being. I think that it's a platform that was built as part of the Driftway Park. It's all out of pressure-treated wood. Most of it's in fairly good shape, but there's some boards that definitely need a replacement. So we just need to get on that, make sure it is safe. But I don't think we need to do like a full-blown replacement of it. We just need to get it repaired. And then, as we circle back, like once we get some of these access roads and parkings and things like that done, maybe one of the next things that the commission should be readdressing is the Driftway Park. Jen brought to light how much that's used. It's our most used.
Popular part.
So, and you can see it. I mean, the traffic is heavy. The parking's heavy. So, do we have adequate parking? Can we improve any parking? Is it it's gonna even get busier, I think, with the new dog park there. So are we serving our residents well by the work that we do at that park, or do we need to make?
Well, that was one thing that came up with Sean the other day. We were talking about we need a link from the dog park to one of our trails that needs to be created. So that's a trail project.
So that would work out.
A tiny little bit of clipping needs to be done to just open it up a little bit.
There's the work for your volunteer.
There we
You
go.
probably want to connect him with Howard.
Yeah.
Howard, yeah.
Yep. No, our Trails group is pretty, has got that on the run.
Yeah.
Right, okay, so, I mean, we could talk about other things, or we could.
Or we could
just
go
wait till
home.
August.
Well, is there anything?
Paul, you want to vote on that?
I'm standing by
Not
with a
really.
motion.
Well,
Just give me
okay,
the
here's
word.
a quick Toll Brothers fun fact, is that we're gonna be meeting on Thursday to review going into phase 2. So I think that they're, starting Wednesday to put up some fence and a limit of work between the Hadley School, and they are satisfying a list of conditions that the planning board has. Once those are done, the replication's in, the basins are fully in and functioning. If you haven't noticed, that construction's going like gangbusters out there.
Yeah.
And I
But-
think that the building inspector had 4 structure permits today that he was looking for sign-offs on. So, I mean, so they're being built and they're ready to go into phase 2. And we did discuss that we didn't need them to come back to us
Right.
per se, but we are certainly in the loop.
So just be aware that phase 2 means another substantial area of clearing,
It does.
you know? Well, that's all of a sudden when people
Yeah.
don't realize it until the trees start to fall, and
Oh, yeah,
it's pretty significant,
it is gonna be. It already is.
yeah.
Well,
But
another big import of fill is what it is, so, you get
Right.
a lot of fill coming into town.
Yeah.
Because they're
And-
building it up.
But the replication pieces that they've done, the mitigation work and stuff, seems to be compliant, you know? And the times that we've had issues, I think for the most part, they've been responsive.
I think so too. It's unfortunate, but it does happen and,
So,
as
Okay.
long as they respond to us, that's the big thing quickly.
I get probably several emails a day about the project, so yes, we're well wrapped into what's happening. Not all of it is jurisdictional for us, a lot of it's still just part of the construction oversight and like what's going on, but I can just tell you that they are ready to go into phase 2. And I think the town is wants to give them permission as soon as they're ready, so.
Sounds good.
All right.
I think we're all set then.
Trying to think if there was
Something else?
nothing else.
Frank doesn't want to leave.
No, I don't
No,
believe
we're
you.
having such fun. I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.